Plants need nutrients. They absolutely need them to survive. Just like you need nutrients, plants need them. And plants cannot survive on the sugar they make alone. They need a lot of other substances. We know that plants need carbon dioxide. They need water, they need light. What do they need carbon dioxide, water, and light for? Photosynthesis. And that makes sugar, and that's great. But they need a whole lot of other trace elements as well. They need to pull nutrients from the soil. And without those nutrients, they could not make their own proteins. It is a very common misconception that a plant will grow if you just put it in water. Plants need more than just water. Anybody tried ever growing just a plant in regular water? Eventually they die because they lack nutrients. I was just in another professor's office who was trying to grow plants in water, and I didn't have the heart to tell him. Especially because they tell me all the time how I do things wrong. So I'm just going to watch this one happen. When you have a garden, your garden tends to pull nutrients out of the soil. Eventually, you have to add those nutrients back. Plants are net taking nutrients out of the soil because they're trying to grow. Granted, eventually they die, and when they die, those nutrients go back into the soil. Soil itself is not just dirt. Gosh, it's so easy to think of it as dirt, right? You get a shovel full, you pop it out, and you're like, dirt. But it's made up of a whole bunch of stuff. One, the vast majority, well, not the majority, but a lot of soil is made up of air. Just pockets of air. Makes sense. Hopefully it works, because that means that plants can draw oxygen from it. A good portion of it's made of minerals. Okay, you knew that. You're like, okay, it's dirt and rocks, and it hurts my back to move. Part of the reason it hurts your back to move is because a lot of it's water. Water's heavy. And you're lifting with your back, because you just got to get it done. And then a very small amount of it's organic. This organic component is going to be crucial to plant survival. It's made up of dead plants, it's made up of dead animals, and the waste from those organisms. You need that organic material in order to provide nutrients for plants to survive. The early Earth's land mass had no organic molecules in it, and it didn't support life. It wasn't until we had lichens coming out. What are lichens again? Yeah, an algae and a fungus interacting together. As those algae break down rocks, you're getting nutrients into the building, into the minerals. And the algae themselves the algae and the fungus are dying, which then leave behind these organic residues. As that built up on land, suddenly now you've got a substrate that other plants can grow on. And you can start cycling. Without those initial pioneer organisms, you would never have life on land. Everything would be confined to the oceans. Plants absolutely 100% need nitrogen. Yeah, they need carbon dioxide too, but they need nitrogen. And they cannot take it from the atmosphere. The only inorganic molecules that they can take from the atmosphere is carbon dioxide, and they are super important to the carbon cycle. Don't get wrong. But they need nitrogen. What does nitrogen is a key component to ammonia, NH3. What do we use ammonia for? We and plants. Proteins. Ammonia is what gives amino acids their names. They've got an amino group, ammonia. In order to get that, you're going to rely on prokaryotes. Hopefully this is all where it all starts coming together. Prokaryotes are going to fix nitrogen. They take nitrogen out of the atmosphere and convert it to an organic molecule that plants are then able to take up. Those plants then can convert it into proteins. Then we eat the plants, and as we eat the plants, we can then break down their organic molecules and use them to build our own organic molecules. And then we die. As we die and decompose, it releases nitrogen back to the atmosphere that those bacteria are able to digest again. And the cycle continues. Some soil lacks prokaryotes. Prokaryotes just don't grow well there. These are nitrogen-poor soils. And plants have to adapt to these nitrogen-poor environments. So the way they adapt is where they cannot get nitrogen from bacteria, they turn to animals. They turn to other organisms in order to pull nitrogen in. And this is where you get your carnivorous plants. Carnivorous plants are an adaptation to nitrogen-poor conditions. You have lots of different kinds of carnivorous plants. I think you guys would be interested in this part. So carnivorous plants live in nitrogen-poor environments. One type of carnivorous plant is the pitfall trap. What happens is you've got a large open vase, and at the bottom of that vase, you've got a solution of water, because it rains. Water's put into the bottom, and into that solution there are digestive enzymes. Enzymes that break these animals down in order to release nitrogen. Some of them are very simple. They're just big and open. Fly comes in, or some insect comes in and lands, slips to the bottom, and gets digested. It's not like that. They just sort of flop around in the digestive fluids for a while, but eventually drown and get converted into nitrogen that the plant uses for making amino acids. Some are much more complex. This is a very large one. And you'll notice it's got sort of, these things stink, by the way. Why would they stink so much? Yeah, they're trying to attract, it smells like rotting meat. It's to attract flies. And you've got these big red areas that look like open wounds. So, to flies. So flies go in, they get lost, they get distracted by big red areas that are being shined on it, and eventually they run out of energy trying to find their way back out. And they fall to the bottom where they're digested. So that's the pitfall trap. You might have flypaper traps. In this case, you got sticky mucilage made of glycocalyx, just saying, that's secreted by the plant. Here you got a plant that's got all these long tubes, and each of these tubes produces a little bit of stickiness. And that stickiness holds them in place while thigmotropism wraps the rest of the plant around it. And each of these begins to secrete digestive enzymes, digesting the insect from the inside out. It doesn't move, it dies, and the nitrogen is taken into the plant to produce proteins. The one you're probably most familiar with is the snap trap. This group of plants is going to have these hair cells or these hair triggers on them. And as some organism lands, a touch, so thigmotropism, a quick response is going to be caused by changes in water pressure that shut the two sides together. Now, this is not pressure to crush it. What happens is it's trapped there, and the inside of the mouth is secreting digestive enzymes that breaks it down and allows the plant to take in nitrogen. Interesting note about Venus flytraps is if you ever get one, don't just sit there and touch it and make it keep closing. These heads can only open and close about 2 to 3 times before they fall off. They're not there to entertain us. They're there to catch food. Does that make sense? So if you keep touching it, it dies because it can't get food. Bladder traps. This doesn't look as interesting. It's not the cool ones that you see on shows. There's not big reactions that happen. But to me, they're super interesting because they use osmosis. They're interesting because they use osmosis. What ends up happening here is you've got these bells. And you've got different chambers to them. Like that, a little semi-permeable membrane. So what will happen is you end up having a bunch of cells that push charged ions down into one of these chambers. So if you have a lot of charge here or a lot of solutes here, which way does the water want to flow? It wants to flow toward that, toward those charges, right? You've created a little suction pump, and it's pulling organisms into that inner chamber where they're digested. It's just constant, it's like a little vacuum going along, sucking up any microorganism or insect that gets around it. And then, I guess the metaphor for our lives is the lobster pot trap. What happens in these plants is they've got these big underwater root systems that have lots of twists and turns. And normally, the vast majority of the time, twists and turns are there to increase surface area, right? This time they're there to create a maze. Because the organism goes in, you know, it's like it's attracted to something the plant's secreting. It goes into this lobster pot trap, and it starts to go through this maze. As it's going through the maze, it's starting to be digested. Once it realizes, okay, as much as they realize things, if it ever tries to escape, now it's got to navigate its way back through the maze in the original way it came, and they're not that smart. So before they're able to find their way back out, they're fully digested, and the plant gets their nitrogen. It's like an evil labyrinth. It's called a lobster pot trap because lobster pots work in the same fashion. There's one entrance, and then once you get through that entrance, you can't get back out the way you came in.